Section 24 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 24. The pleasures I enjoyed had again charms enough to make me forget all the troubles and calamities I had undergone, but could not cure me of my inclination to make new voyages. I therefore bought goods, departed with them for the best seaport, and there, that I might not be obliged to depend upon a captain, but have a ship at my own command, I remained till one was built on purpose, at my own charge. When the ship was ready, I went on board with my goods, but not having enough to load her, I agreed to take with me several merchants of different nations with their merchandise. We sailed with the first fair wind, and after a long navigation, the first place we touched was at a desert island, where we found an egg of a roe, equal in size to that I formerly mentioned. There was a young roc, it just ready to be hatched, and its bill had begun to appear. The merchants whom I had taken on board, and who landed with me, broke the egg with hatchets, and made a hole in it, pulled out the young roc piecemeal, and roasted it. I had earnestly entreated them not to meddle with the egg, but they would not listen to me. Scarcely had they finished their repast, when there appeared in the air, at a considerable distance from us, two great clouds. The captain, whom I had hired to navigate my ship, knowing by experience what that meant, said they were the male and female roc that belonged to the young one, and pressed us to re-embark with all speed, to prevent the misfortune which he saw would otherwise befall us. We hastened on board, and set sail with all possible expedition. In the meantime, the two roes approached with a frightful noise, which they redoubled when they saw the egg broken, and their young one gone. They flew back in the direction they had come, and disappeared for some time, while we made all the sail we could to endeavour to prevent that which unhappily befell us. They soon returned, and we observed that each of them carried between its talons stones, or rather rocks, of a monstrous size. When they came directly over my ship, they hovered, and one of them let fall a stone, but by the dexterity of the steersman it missed us, and falling into the sea, divided the water so that we could almost see the bottom. The other roe, to our misfortune, threw his messy burden so exactly upon the middle of the ship as to split it into 1,000 pieces. The mariners and passengers were all crushed to death or sunk. I myself was of the number of the latter, but as I came up again, I fortunately caught hold of a piece of the wreck, and swimming, sometimes with one hand and sometimes with the other, but always holding fast my board, the wind and the tide favouring me, I came to an island whose shore was very steep. I overcame that difficulty, however, and got ashore. I sat down upon the grass to recover myself from my fatigue, after which I went into the island to explore it. It seemed to be a delicious garden. I found trees everywhere, some of them bearing green, and others ripe fruits, and streams of fresh pure water running in pleasant meanders. I ate of the fruits, which I found excellent, and drank of the water, which was very light and good. When night closed in, I lay down upon the grass in a convenient spot, but could not sleep an hour at a time, my mind being apprehensive of danger. I spent best part of the night in alarm, and reproached myself for my imprudence in not remaining at home rather than undertaking this last voyage. These reflections carried me so far that I began to form a design against my life, But daylight dispersed these melancholy thoughts. I got up and walked among the trees, but not without some fears. When I was a little advanced into the island, I saw an old man, who appeared very weak and infirm. He was sitting on the bank of a stream, and at first I took him to be one who had been shipwrecked like myself. I went towards him and saluted him, but he only slightly bowed his head. I asked him why he sat so still, but instead of answering me, he made a sign for me to take him upon my back and carry him over the brook, signifying that it was to gather fruit. I believed him really to stand in need of my assistance, took him upon my back, and having carried him over, bade him get down, and for that end stooped, that he might get off with ease. But instead of doing so, which I laugh at every time I think of it, the old man, who to me appeared quite decrepit, clasped his legs nimbly about my neck, when I perceived his skin to resemble that of a cow. He sat astride upon my shoulders, and held my throat so tight that I thought he would have strangled me, the apprehension of which made me swoon and fall down. Notwithstanding my fainting, the ill-natured old fellow kept fast upon my neck, but opened his legs a little to give me time to recover my breath. When I had done so, he thrust one of his feet against my stomach, and struck me so rudely on the side with the other, that he forced me to rise up against my will. Having arisen, he made me walk under the trees, and forced me now and then to stop to gather and eat fruit such as we found. He never left me all day, and when I lay down to rest at night, laid himself down with me, holding always fast about my neck. Every morning he pushed me to make me awake, and afterwards obliged me to get up and walk, and pressed me with his feet. You may judge then, gentlemen, what trouble I was in, to be loaded with such a burden, of which I could not get rid. One day I found in my way several dry calabashes that had fallen from a tree. I took a large one, and after cleaning it, pressed into it some juice of grapes, which abounded in the island. Having filled the calabash, I put it by in a convenient place, and going thither again some days after, I tasted it, and found the wine so good that it soon made me forget my sorrow, gave me new vigour, and so exhilarated my spirits, that I began to sing and dance as I walked along. The old man, perceiving the effect which this liquor had upon me, and that I carried him with more ease than before, made me a sign to give him some of it. I handed him the calabash, and the liquor pleasing his palate, he drank it all off. There being a considerable quantity of it, he became drunk immediately, and the fumes getting up into his head, he began to sing after his manner, and to dance with his breech upon my shoulders. His jolting made him vomit, and he loosened his legs from about me by degrees. Finding that he did not press me as before, I threw him upon the ground, where he lay without motion. I then took up a great stone, and crushed his head to pieces. I was extremely glad to be thus freed for ever from this troublesome fellow. I now walked towards the beach, where I met the crew of a ship that had cast anchor to take in water. They were surprised to see me, but more so at hearing the particulars of my adventures. "You fell," said they, "into the hands of the old man of the sea, and are the first who ever escaped strangling by his malicious tricks. He never quitted those he had once made himself master of, till he had destroyed them, and he has made this island notorious by the number of men he has slain, so that the merchants and mariners who landed upon it durst not advance into the island but in numbers at a time." After having informed me of these things, they carried me with them to the ship. The captain received me with great kindness, when they told him what had befallen me. He put out again to sea, and after some days' sail we arrived at the harbour of a great city, the houses of which were built with hewn stone. One of the merchants who had taken me into his friendship invited me to go along with him, and carried me to a place appointed for the accommodation of foreign merchants. He gave me a large bag, and having recommended me to some people of the town, who used to gather cocoa nuts, desired them to take me with them. "Go," said he, "follow them, and act as you see them do, but do not separate from them, otherwise you may endanger your life." Having thus spoken, he gave me provisions for the journey, and I went with them. We came to a thick forest of cocoa trees, very lofty, with trunks so smooth that it was not possible to climb to the branches that bore the fruit. When we entered the forest, we saw a great number of apes of several sizes, who fled as soon as they perceived us, and climbed up to the top of the trees with surprising swiftness. The merchants with whom I was gathered stones and threw them at the apes on the trees. I did the same, and the apes, out of revenge, threw cocoa nuts at us so fast and with such gestures as sufficiently testified their anger and resentment. We gathered up the cocoa nuts, and from time to time threw stones to provoke the apes, so that by this stratagem we filled our bags with cocoa nuts, which it had been impossible otherwise to have done. When we had gathered our number, we returned to the city, where the merchant who had sent me to the forest gave me the value of the cocoas I brought. "Go on," said he, "and do the like every day until you have got money enough to carry you home." I thanked him for his advice, and gradually collected as many cocoa nuts as produced me a considerable sum. The vessel in which I had come sailed with some merchants, who loaded her with cocoa nuts. I expected the arrival of another, which anchored soon after for the like loading. I embarked in her all the cocoa nuts I had, and when she was ready to sail, took leave of the merchant who had been so kind to me. But he could not embark with me, because he had not finished his business at port. We sailed towards the islands, where pepper grows in great plenty. From thence we went to the isle of Comari, where the best species of wood of aloes grows, and whose inhabitants have made it an inviolable law to themselves to drink no wine, and suffer no place of debauch. I exchanged my cocoa with those 2 islands for pepper and wood of aloes, and went with other merchants a pearl fishing. I hired divers, who brought me up some that were very large and pure. I embarked in a vessel that happily arrived at Bussorah. From thence I returned to Bagdad, where I made vast sums of my pepper, wood of aloes, and pearls. I gave the 10th of my gains in alms, as I had done upon my return from my other voyages, and endeavoured to dissipate my fatigues by amusements of different kinds. When Sinbad had finished his story, he ordered 100 sequins to be given to Hindbad, who retired with the other guests. But next morning the same company returned to dine with rich Sinbad, who, after having treated them as formerly, requested their attention, and gave the following account of his 6th voyage. End of section 24. Section 25 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 25. Gentlemen, you long without doubt to know how, after having been shipwrecked 5 times, and escaped so many dangers, I could resolve again to tempt fortune, and expose myself to new hardships. I am myself astonished at my conduct when I reflect upon it, and must certainly have been actuated by my destiny. But, be that as it may, after a year's rest I prepared for a 6th voyage, notwithstanding the entreaties of my kindred and friends, who did all in their power to dissuade me. Instead of taking my way by the Persian Gulf, I travelled once more through several provinces of Persia and the Indies, and arrived at a seaport, where I embarked in a ship, the captain of which was bound on a long voyage. It was long indeed, and at the same time so unfortunate that the captain and pilot lost their course. They, however, at last discovered where they were, but we had no reason to rejoice at the circumstance. Suddenly we saw the captain quit his post, uttering loud lamentations. He threw off his turban, pulled his beard, and beat his head like a madman. We asked him the reason, and he answered that he was in the most dangerous place in all the ocean. A rapid current carries the ship along with it, and we shall all perish in less than a quarter of an hour. Pray to God to deliver us from this peril. We cannot escape, if he did not take pity on us." At these words he ordered the sails to be lowered, but all the ropes broke, and the ship was carried by the current to the foot of an inaccessible mountain, where she struck and went to pieces, yet in such a manner that we saved our lives, our provisions, and the best of our goods. This being over, the captain said to us, "God has done what pleased him. Each of us may dig his grave and bid the world adieu, for we are all in so fatal a place that none shipwrecked here have ever returned to their homes." His discourse afflicted us sensibly, and we embraced each other, bewailing our deplorable lot. The mountain at the foot of which we were wrecked formed part of the coast of a very large island. It was covered with wrecks, and from the vast number of human bones we saw everywhere, and which filled us with horror, we concluded that multitudes of people had perished here. It is also incredible what a quantity of goods and riches we found cast ashore. All these objects served only to augment our despair. In all other places rivers run from their channels into the sea, but here a river of fresh water runs out of the sea into a dark cavern, whose entrance is very high and spacious. What is most remarkable in this place is, that the stones of the mountain are of crystal, rubies, or other precious stones. Here is also a sort of fountain of pitch or bitumen, that runs into the sea, which the fish swallow, and evacuate soon afterwards, turned into ambergris, and this the waves throw up on the beach in great quantities. Trees also grow here, most of which are wood of aloes, equal in goodness to those of Comari. To finish the description of this place, which may well be called a gulf, since nothing ever returns from it, it is not possible for ships to get off once they approach within a certain distance. If they be driven thither by a wind from the sea, the wind and the current impel them, and if they come into it when a land wind blows, which might seem to favour their getting out again, the height of the mountain stops the wind, and occasions a calm, so that the force of the current carries them ashore, and what completes the misfortune is, that there is no possibility of ascending the mountain, or of escaping by sea. We continued upon the shore in a state of despair, and expected death every day. At first we divided our provisions as equally as we could, and thus every one lived a longer or shorter time according to his temperance, and the use he made of his provisions. Those who died first were interred by the survivors, and I paid the last duty to all my companions. Nor are you to wonder at this, for besides that I husbanded the provision that fell to my share better than they. I had some of my own which I did not share with my comrades. Yet when I buried the last, I had so little remaining, that I thought I could not long survive. I dug a grave, resolving to lie down in it, because there was no one left to inter me. I must confess to you at the same time, that while I was thus employed, I could not but reproach myself as the cause of my own ruin, and repented that I had ever undertaken this last voyage. Nor did I stop at reflections only, but had well nigh hastened my own death, and began to tear my hands with my teeth. But it pleased God once more to take compassion on me, and put it in my mind to go to the bank of the river which ran into the great cavern. Considering its probable course with great attention, I said to myself, "This river which runs thus underground must somewhere have an issue. If I make a raft and leave myself to the current, it will convey me to some inhabited island, or I shall perish. If I be drowned, I lose nothing, but only change one kind of death for another. And if I get out of this fatal place, I shall not only avoid the sad fate of my comrades, but perhaps find some new occasion of enriching myself. Who knows but fortune waits upon my getting off this dangerous shelf to compensate my shipwreck in usury?" I immediately went to work upon large pieces of timber and cables, for I had choice of them, and tied them together so strongly that I made a very solid raft. When I had finished, I loaded it with some bulses of rubies, emeralds, ambergris, rock crystal, and bales of rich stuffs. Having balanced my cargo exactly, and fastened it well to the raft, I went on board with 2 oars that I had made, and leaving it to the course of the river, resigned myself to the will of God. As soon as I entered the cavern, I lost all light, and the stream carried me I knew not whither. Thus I floated some days in perfect darkness, and once found the arch so low that it very nearly touched my head, which made me cautious afterwards to avoid the like danger. All this while I ate nothing but what was just necessary to support nature. Yet notwithstanding my frugality, all my provisions were spent. Then a pleasing stupor seized upon me. I cannot tell how long it continued, but when I revived I was surprised to find myself in an extensive plain on the brink of a river, where my raft was tied amidst a great number of negroes. I got up as soon as I saw them, and saluted them. They spoke to me, but I did not understand their language. I was so transported with joy that I knew not whether I was asleep or awake, but being persuaded that I was not asleep, I recited the following words in Arabic aloud: "Call upon the Almighty, he will help thee. Thou needst not perplex thyself about anything else. Shut thy eyes, and while thou art asleep, God will change thy bad fortune into good." One of the blacks, who understood Arabic, hearing me speak thus, came towards me, and said, "Brother, be not surprised to see us. We are inhabitants of this country, and came hither today to water our fields, by digging little canals from this river, which comes out of the neighbouring mountain. We observed something floating upon the water, went to see what it was, and perceiving your raft, one of us swam into the river, and brought it thither, where we fastened it, as you see, until you should awake. Pray tell us your history, for it must be extraordinary. How did you venture yourself into this river, and whence did you come?" I begged of them first to give me something to eat, and then I would satisfy their curiosity. They gave me several sorts of food, and when I had satisfied my hunger, I related all that had befallen me, which they listened to with attentive surprise. As soon as I had finished, they told me by the person who spoke Arabic and interpreted to them what I said, that it was one of the most wonderful stories they had ever heard, and that I must go along with them and tell it to their king myself, it being too extraordinary to be related by any other than the person to whom the events had happened. I assured them that I was ready to do whatever they pleased. They immediately sent for a horse, which was brought in a little time, and having helped me to mount, some of them walked before to shew the way, while the rest took my raft and cargo and followed. We marched till we came to the capital of Serendib, for it was in that island I had landed. The blacks presented me to their king. I approached his throne, and saluted him as I used to do the kings of the Indies, that is to say, I prostrated myself at his feet. The prince ordered me to rise, received me with an obliging air, and made me sit down near him. He first asked me my name, and I answered, "People call me Sinbad the Voyager, because of the many voyages I have undertaken, and I am a citizen of Bagdad. But, resumed he, how came you into my dominions, and from whence came you last? I concealed nothing from the king. I related to him all that I have told you, and his majesty was so surprised and pleased that he commanded my adventures to be written in letters of gold and laid up in the archives of his kingdom. At last my raft was brought in, and the bales opened in his presence. He admired the quantity of wood of aloes and ambergris, but above all the rubies and emeralds, for he had none in his treasury that equalled them. Observing that he looked on my jewels with pleasure, and viewed the most remarkable among them one after another, I fell prostrate at his feet, and took the liberty to say to him, "Sir, not only my person is at your majesty's service, but the cargo of the raft, and I would beg of you to dispose of it as your own." He answered me with a smile, "Sinbad, I will take care not to covet anything of yours, or to take anything from you that God has given you. Far from lessening your wealth, I design to augment it, and will not let you quit my dominions without marks of my liberality." All the answer I returned were prayers for the prosperity of that nobly minded prince, and commendations of his generosity and bounty. He charged one of his officers to take care of me, and ordered people to serve me at his own expense. The officer was very faithful in the execution of his commission, and caused all the goods to be carried to the lodgings provided for me. I went every day at a set hour to make my court to the king, and spent the rest of my time in viewing the city, and what was most worthy of notice. The isle of Serendib is situated just under the equinoctial line, so that the days and nights there are always of 12 hours each, and the island is 80 parasangs in length, and as many in breadth. The capital stands at the end of a fine valley in the middle of the island, encompassed by mountains, the highest in the world. They are seen 3 days' sail off at sea. Rubies and several sorts of minerals abound, and the rocks are for the most part composed of a metalline stone made use of to cut and polish other precious stones. All kinds of rare plants and trees grow there, especially cedars and cocoa nut. There is also a pearl fishing in the mouth of its principal river, and in some of its valleys are found diamonds. I made, by way of devotion, a pilgrimage to the place where Adam was confined after his banishment from paradise, and had the curiosity to go to the top of the mountain. When I returned to the city, I prayed the king to allow me to return to my own country, and he granted me permission in the most obliging and most honourable manner. He would needs force a rich present upon me, and when I went to take my leave of him, he gave me one much more considerable, and at the same time charged me with a letter for the commander of the faithful, our sovereign, saying to me, "I pray you give this present from me and this letter to the caliph, and assure him of my friendship." I took the present and letter in a very respectful manner, and promised his majesty punctually to execute the commission with which he was pleased to honour me. Before I embarked, this prince sent for the captain and the merchants who were to go with me, and ordered them to treat me with all possible respect. The letter from the king of Serendib was written on the skin of a certain animal of great value, because of its being so scarce, and of a yellowish colour. The characters of this letter were of azure, and the contents as follows: "The king of the Indies, before whom march 100 elephants, who lives in a palace that shines with 100,000 rubies, and who has in his treasury 20,000 crowns enriched with diamonds, to Caliph Haroon al Rashid. Though the present we send you be inconsiderable, receive it however as a brother and a friend, in consideration of the hearty friendship which we bear for you, and of which we are willing to give you proof. We desire the same part in your friendship, considering that we believe it to be our merit, being of the same dignity with yourself. We conjure you this in quality of a brother. Adieu. The present consisted first of one single ruby made into a tin cup about 1/2 foot high, an inch thick, and filled with round pearls of 1/2 drachm each. 2. The skin of a serpent whose scales were as large as an ordinary piece of gold, and had the virtue to preserve from sickness those who lay upon it. 3. 50,000 drachms of the best wood of aloes, with 30 grains of camphor as big as pistachios. 4. A female slave of ravishing beauty, whose apparel was all covered over with jewels. The ship set sail, and after a very successful navigation we landed at Bussorah, and from thence I went to Bagdad, where the first thing I did was to acquit myself of my commission. Scheherazade stopped because day appeared, and next night proceeded thus. I took the king of Serendib's letter, and went to present myself at the gate of the commander of the faithful, followed by the beautiful slave, and such of my own family as carried the presents. I stated the reason of my coming, and was immediately conducted to the throne of the caliph. I made my reverence, and after a short speech gave him the letter and present. When he had read what the king of Serendib wrote to him, he asked me if that prince was really so rich and potent as he represented himself in this letter. I prostrated myself a second time, and rising again, said, "Commander of the faithful, I can assure your majesty he doth not exceed the truth. I bear him witness. Nothing is more worthy of admiration than the magnificence of his palace. When the prince appears in public, he has a throne fixed on the back of an elephant, and marches betwixt 2 ranks of his ministers, favourites, and other people of his court. Before him, upon the same elephant, an officer carries a golden lance in his hand, and behind the throne there is another who stands upright with a column of gold, on the top of which is an emerald 1/2 foot long and an inch thick. Before him march a guard of 1,000 men, clad in cloth of gold and silk, and mounted on elephants richly caparisoned. While the king is on his march, the officer who is before him on the same elephant cries from time to time with a loud voice, 'Behold the great monarch, the potent and redoubtable Sultan of the Indies, whose palace is covered with 100,000 rubies, and who possesses 20,000 crowns of diamonds. Behold the monarch greater than Solomon, and the powerful Maharajah.' After he has pronounced those words, the officer behind the throne cries in his turn, 'This monarch so great and so powerful must die, must die, must die.' And the officer before him replies, 'Praise be to him who lives for ever.' Farther, the king of Serendib is so just that there are no judges in his dominions. His people have no need of them. They understand and observe justice rigidly of themselves." The caliph was much pleased with my account. "The wisdom of that king," said he, "appears in his letter, and after what you tell me, I must confess that his wisdom is worthy of his people, and his people deserve so wise a prince." Having spoken thus, he dismissed me, and sent me home with a rich present. Sinbad left off, and his company retired. Hindbad having first received 100 sequins, the next day they returned to hear the relation of his 7th and last voyage. Section 26 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 26. Being returned from my 6th voyage, said Sinbad, I absolutely laid aside all thoughts of travelling, for, besides that my age now required rest, I was resolved no more to expose myself to such risks as I had encountered, so that I thought of nothing but to pass the rest of my days in tranquillity. One day, as I was treating my friends, one of my servants came and told me that an officer of the caliph's inquired for me. I rose from table and went to him. The caliph, he said, has sent me to tell you that he must speak with you. I followed the officer to the palace, where being presented to the caliph, I saluted him by prostrating myself at his feet. Sinbad, said he to me, I stand in need of your service. You must carry my answer and present to the king of Serendib. It is but just I should return his civility. This command of the caliph was to me like a clap of thunder. Commander of the faithful, I replied, I am ready to do whatever your majesty shall think fit to command, but I beseech you most humbly to consider what I have undergone. I have also made a vow never to go out of Bagdad. Hence I took occasion to give him a full and particular account of all my adventures, which he had the patience to hear out. As soon as I had finished, I confess, he said, that the things you tell me are very extraordinary. Yet you must, for my sake, undertake this voyage which I propose to you. You will only have to go to the Isle of Serendib, and deliver the commission which I give you. After that you are at liberty to return. But you must go, for you know it would not comport with my dignity to be indebted to the king of that island. Perceiving that the caliph insisted upon my compliance, I submitted and told him that I was willing to obey. He was very well pleased, and ordered me 1,000 sequins for the expenses of my journey. I prepared for my departure in a few days, and as soon as the caliph's letter and present were delivered to me, I went to Bussorah, where I embarked, and had a very happy voyage. Having arrived at the Isle of Serendib, I acquainted the king's ministers with my commission, and prayed them to get me speedy audience. They did so, and I was conducted to the palace in an honourable manner, where I saluted the king by prostration, according to custom. That prince knew me immediately, and testified very great joy at seeing me. Sinbad, said he, you are welcome. I have many times thought of you since you departed. I bless the day on which we see one another once more. I made my compliment to him, and after having thanked him for his kindness, delivered the caliph's letter and present, which he received with all imaginable satisfaction. The caliph's present was a complete suit of cloth of gold, valued at 1,000 sequins, 50 robes of rich stuff, 100 of white cloth, the finest of Cairo, Suez, and Alexandria, a vessel of agate, broader than deep, 1 inch thick and 1/2 foot wide, the bottom of which represented in bas relief a man with one knee on the ground, who held bow and an arrow, ready to discharge at a lion. He sent him also a rich tablet, which, according to tradition, belonged to the great Solomon. The caliph's letter was as follows: Greeting, in the name of the sovereign guide of the right way, from the dependent on God, Haroon al Rashid, whom God hath set in the place of vice-regent to his prophet, after his ancestors of happy memory, to the potent and esteemed Rajah of Serendib. We received your letter with joy, and send you this from our imperial residence, the garden of superior wits. We hope when you look upon it you will perceive our good intention, and be pleased with it. Adieu. The king of Serendib was highly gratified that the caliph answered his friendship. A little time after this audience, I solicited leave to depart, and had much difficulty to obtain it. I procured it, however, at last, and the king, when he dismissed me, made me a very considerable present. I embarked immediately to return to Bagdad, but had not the good fortune to arrive there so speedily as I had hoped. God ordered it otherwise. 3 or 4 days after my departure, we were attacked by corsairs, who easily seized upon our ship, because it was no vessel of force. Some of the crew offered resistance, which cost them their lives; but for myself and the rest, who were not so imprudent, the corsairs saved us on purpose to make slaves of us. We were all stripped, and instead of our own clothes, they gave us sorry rags, and carried us into a remote island, where they sold us. I fell into the hands of a rich merchant, who, as soon as he bought me, carried me to his house, treated me well, and clad me handsomely for a slave. Some days after, not knowing who I was, he asked me if I understood any trade. I answered that I was no mechanic, but a merchant, and that the corsairs who sold me had robbed me of all I possessed. "But tell me," replied he, "can you shoot with a bow?" I answered that the bow was one of my exercises in my youth. He gave me a bow and arrows, and taking me behind him upon an elephant, carried me to a thick forest some leagues from the town. We penetrated a great way into the wood, and when he thought fit to stop, he bade me alight, then shewing me a great tree, "Climb up that," said he, "and shoot at the elephants as you see them pass by, for there is a prodigious number of them in this forest, and if any of them fall, come and give me notice." Having spoken thus, he left me victuals, and returned to the town, and I continued upon the tree all night. I saw no elephant during that time, but next morning, as soon as the sun was up, I perceived a great number. I shot several arrows among them, and at last one of the elephants fell. When the rest retired immediately, and left me at liberty to go and acquaint my patron with my booty. When I had informed him, he gave me a good meal, commended my dexterity, and caressed me highly. We went afterwards together to the forest, where we dug a hole for the elephant. My patron designed to return when it was rotten, and take his teeth to trade with. I continued this employment for 2 months, and killed an elephant every day, getting sometimes upon one tree, and sometimes upon another. One morning, as I looked for the elephants, I perceived with extreme amazement that, instead of passing by me across the forest as usual, they stopped, and came to me with a horrible noise, in such number that the plain was covered and shook under them. They encompassed the tree in which I was concealed, with their trunks extended, and all fixed their eyes upon. At this alarming spectacle I continued immovable, and was so much terrified that my bow and arrows fell out of my hand. My fears were not without cause, for after the elephants had stared upon me some time, one of the largest of them put his trunk around the foot of the tree, plucked it up, and threw it on the ground. I fell with the tree, and the elephant, taking me up with his trunk, laid me on his back, where I sat more like one dead than alive, with my quiver on my shoulder. He put himself afterwards at the head of the rest, who followed him in troops, carried me a considerable way, then laid me down on the ground, and retired with all his companions. Conceive, if you can, the condition I was in. I thought myself in a dream. After having lain some time, and seeing the elephants gone, I got up, and found I was upon a long and broad hill, almost covered with the bones and teeth of elephants. I confess to you that this object furnished me with abundance of reflections. I admired the instinct of those animals. I doubted not but that was their burying place, and that they carried me thither on purpose to tell me that I should forbear to persecute them, since I did it only for their teeth. I did not stay on the hill, but turned towards the city, and after having travelled a day and a night, I came to my patron. I met no elephant in my way, which made me think they had retired farther into the forest, to leave me at liberty to come back to the hill without any obstacle. As soon as my patron saw me, "Ah, poor Sinbad!" exclaimed he, "I was in great trouble to know what was become of you. I have been at the forest, where I found a tree newly pulled up, and a bow and arrows on the ground, and after having sought for you in vain, I despaired of ever seeing you more. Pray tell me what befell you, and by what good chance thou art still alive." I satisfied his curiosity, and going both of us next morning to the hill, he found to his great joy that what I told him was true. We loaded the elephant which had carried us with as many teeth as he could bear, and when we returned, "Brother," said my patron, "for I will treat you no more as my slave, after having made such a discovery as will enrich me, God bless you with all happiness and prosperity. I declare before him that I give you your liberty. I concealed from you what I am now going to tell you. The elephants of our forest have every year killed us a great many slaves, whom we sent to seek ivory. For all the cautions we could give them, those crafty animals destroyed them one time or other. God has delivered you from their fury, and has bestowed that favour upon you only. It is a sign that he loves you, and has some use for your service in the world. You have procured me incredible wealth. Formerly we could not procure ivory but by exposing the lives of our slaves, and now our whole city is enriched by your means. Do not think I pretend to have rewarded you by giving you your liberty. I will also give you considerable riches. I could engage all our city to contribute towards making your fortune, but I will have the glory of doing it myself." To this obliging declaration I replied, "Patron, God preserve you. Your giving me my liberty is enough to discharge what you owe me, and I desire no other reward for the service I had the good fortune to do to you and your city, but leave to return to my own country." "Very well," said he, "the monsoon will in a little time bring ships for ivory. I will then send you home, and give you wherewith to bear your charges." I thanked him again for my liberty and his good intentions towards me. I stayed with him expecting the monsoon, and during that time we made so many journeys to the hill that we filled all our warehouses with ivory. The other merchants who traded in it did the same, for it could not be long concealed from them. The ships arrived at last, and my patron, himself having made choice of the ship wherein I was to embark, loaded half of it with ivory on my account, laid in provisions in abundance for my passage, and besides obliged me to accept a present of some curiosities of the country of great value. After I had returned him 1,000 thanks for all his favours, I went aboard. We set sail, and as the adventure which procured me this liberty was very extraordinary, I had it continually in my thoughts. We stopped at some islands to take in fresh provisions. Our vessel being come to a port on the main land in the Indies, we touched there, and not being willing to venture by sea to Bussorah, I landed my proportion of the ivory, resolving to proceed on my journey by land. I made vast sums of my ivory, bought several rarities which I intended for presents, and when my equipage was ready, set out in company with a large caravan of merchants. I was a long time on the way, and suffered much, but endured all with patience, when I considered that I had nothing to fear from the seas, from pirates, from serpents, or from other perils to which I had been exposed. All these fatigues ended at last, and I arrived safe at Bagdad. I went immediately to wait upon the caliph, and gave him an account of my embassy. "That prince," said he, "had been uneasy, as I was so long in returning, but that he always hoped God would preserve me." When I told him the adventure of the elephants, he seemed much surprised, and would never have given any credit to it had he not known my veracity. He deemed this story and the other relations I had given him to be so curious, that he ordered one of his secretaries to write them in characters of gold, and lay them up in his treasury. I retired well satisfied with the honours I received, and the presents which he gave me, and ever since I have devoted myself wholly to my family, kindred, and friends. Sinbad here finished the relation of his seventh and last voyage, and then addressing himself to Hindbad, "Well, friend," said he, "did you ever hear of any person that suffered so much as I have done, or of any mortal that has gone through so many vicissitudes? Is it not reasonable that after all this I should enjoy a quiet and pleasant life?" As he said this, Hindbad drew near to him, and kissing his hand, said, "I must acknowledge, sir, that you have gone through many imminent dangers. My troubles are not comparable to yours. If they afflict me for a time, I comfort myself with the thoughts of the profit I get by them. You not only deserve a quiet life, but are worthy of all the riches you enjoy, because you make of them such a good and generous use. May you therefore continue to live in happiness and joy till the day of your death." Sinbad gave him 100 sequins more, received him into the number of his friends, desired him to quit his potter's employment, and come and dine every day with him, that he might have reason to remember Sinbad the voyager. Section 26.
Section 27 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicholas Illich. The Arabian Nights Entertainment, Volume 1, by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott, Section 27. The Three Apples. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid one day commanded the Grand Vizier Jafir to come to his palace the night following. "Vizier," said he, "I will take a walk around the town to inform myself what people say, and particularly how they are pleased with my officers of justice. If there be any against whom they have cause of just complaint, we will turn them out, and put others in their stead, who shall officiate better. If, on the contrary, there be any that have gained their applause, we will have that esteem for them which they deserve." The Grand Vizier being come to the palace at the hour appointed, the Caliph, he, and Mesrour, the chief of the eunuchs, disguised themselves so they could not be known, and went out, all three together. They passed through several places and by several markets. As they entered a small street, they perceived by the light of the moon a tall man with a white beard, who carried nets on his head and a staff in his hand. "To judge from his appearance," said the Caliph, "that old man is not rich. Let us go to him and inquire into his circumstances." "Honest man," said the Vizier, "who art thou?" The old man replied, "Sir, I am a fisher, but one of the poorest and most miserable of the trade. I went from my house about noon a fishing, and from that time to this I have not been able to catch one fish. At the same time I have a wife and small children, and nothing to maintain them." The Caliph, moved with compassion, said to the fisherman, "Hast thou the courage to go back and cast thy net once more? We will give thee 100 sequins for what thou shalt bring up." At this proposal the fisherman, forgetting all his day's toil, took the Caliph at his word, and returned to the Tigris, accompanied by the Caliph, Jafir, and Mesrour, saying to himself as he went, "These gentlemen seem too honest and reasonable not to reward my pains, and if they give me 100th part of what they promise, it will be an ample recompense." They came to the bank of the river, and the fisherman, having thrown in his net, when he drew it again, brought up a trunk close shut and very heavy. The Caliph made the Grand Vizier pay him 100 sequins immediately, and sent him away. Mesrour, by his master's orders, carried the trunk on his shoulder, and the Caliph was so very eager to know what it contained that he returned to the palace with all speed. When the trunk was opened, they found in it a large basket made of palm leaves, shut up, and the covering of it sewed with red thread. To satisfy the Caliph's impatience, They would not take the time to undo it, but cut the thread with a knife, and took out of the basket a package wrapped up in a sorry piece of hanging, and bound about with a rope, which being untied they found, to their great amazement, the corpse of a young lady, whiter than snow, all cut in pieces. The astonishment of the Caliph was great at this dreadful spectacle. His surprise was instantly changed in a passion, and darting an angry look at the vizier, "Thou wretch," said he, "is this your inspection into the actions of my people? Do they commit such impious murders under thy ministry in my capital, and throw my subjects into the Tigris, that they may cry for vengeance against me at the day of judgment? If thou dost not speedily avenge the murder of this woman, by the death of her murderer, I swear by heaven that I will cause thee and 40 more of thy kindred to be impaled." "Commander of the faithful," replied the Grand Vizier, "I beg your majesty to grant me time to make inquiry." "I will allow thee no more," said the Caliph, "than 3 days." The Vizier Jaaffier went home in great perplexity. "Alas," said he, "how is it possible that in such a vast and populous city as Bagdad I should be able to detect a murderer, who undoubtedly committed the crime without witness, and perhaps may be already gone from hence? Any other vizier than I would take some wretched person out of prison and cause him to be put to death to satisfy the Caliph. But I will not burden my conscience with such a barbarous action. I would rather die than preserve my life by the sacrifice of another innocent person." He ordered the officers of the police and justice to make strict search for the criminal. They sent their servants about, and they were not idle themselves, for they were no less concerned in this matter than the vizier. But all their endeavours were to no purpose. What pains soever they took, they could not discover the murderer, so that the vizier concluded his life to be lost. The 3rd day being arrived, an officer came to the unfortunate minister, with a summons to follow him, which the vizier obeyed. The Caliph asked him for the murderer. He answered, "Commander of the faithful, I have not found any person that could give me the least account of him." The Caliph, full of fury and rage, gave him many reproachful words, and ordered that he and 40 Bermukkees should be impaled at the gate of the palace. In the meanwhile the stakes were preparing, and orders were sent to seize 40 Bermukkees in their houses. A public crier was sent about the city by the Caliph's order, to cry thus: "Those who have a desire to see the Grand Vizier Jaaffier impaled, with 40 of his kindred, let them come to the square before the palace." When all things were ready, the criminal judge and many officers belonging to the palace, having brought out the Grand Vizier with the 40 Bermukkees, set each by the stake designed for him. The multitude of people that filled the square could not, without grief and tears, behold this tragical sight. For the Grand Vizier and the Bermukkees were loved and honored on account of their probity, bounty, and impartiality, not only in Bagdad, but through all the dominions of the Caliph. Nothing could prevent the execution of this prince's severe and irrevocable sentence, and the lives of the most deserving people in the city were just going to be sacrificed, when a young man of handsome mien pressed through the crowd till he came up to the Grand Vizier, and after he had kissed his hand said, "Most excellent Vizier, chief of the emirs of this court, and comforter of the poor, you are not guilty of the crime for which you stand here. Withdraw, and let me expiate the death of the lady that was thrown into the Tigris. It is I who murdered her, and I deserve to be punished for my offense." Though these words occasioned great joy to the vizier, yet he could not but pity the young man, in whose look he saw something that instead of evincing guilt was engaging. But as he was about to answer him, a tall man advanced in years, who had likewise forced his way through the crowd, came up to him, saying, "Do not believe what this young man tells you. I killed that lady who was found in the trunk, and this punishment ought only to fall upon me. I conjure you, in the name of God, not to punish the innocent for the guilty." "Sir," said the young man to the vizier, "I do protest that I am he who committed this vile act, and nobody else had any concern in it." "My son," said the old man, "it is despair that brought you hither, and you would anticipate your destiny. I have lived a long while in this world, and it is time for me to be gone. Let me therefore sacrifice my life for yours." "Sir," said he again to the vizier, I tell you once more I am the murderer. Let me die without delay." The controversy between the old and the young man induced the Grand Vizier to carry them both before the Caliph, to which the judge criminal consented, being glad to serve the Vizier. When he came before the prince, he kissed the ground 7 times, and spake after this manner: "Commander of the faithful, I have brought here before your majesty this old and this young man, each of whom declares himself to be the sole murderer of the lady." The Caliph asked the criminals which of them it was that so cruelly murdered the lady, and threw her into the Tigris. The young man assured him it was he, but the old man maintained the contrary. "Go," said the Caliph to the Grand Vizier, "and cause them both to be impaled." "But, sir," said the Vizier, "if only one of them be guilty, it would be unjust to take the lives of both." At these words the young man spoke again: "I swear by the great God, who has raised the heavens so high, that I am the man who killed the lady, cut her in pieces, and about 4 days ago threw her into the Tigris. I renounce my part of happiness amongst the just at the day of judgment, if what I say be not truth. Therefore I am he that ought to suffer." The Caliph, being surprised at this oath, believed him, especially since the old man made no answer. Whereupon, turning to the young man, "Wretch," said he, "what made thee commit that detestable crime? And what is it that moves thee to offer thyself voluntarily to die?" "Commander of the faithful," said he, "if all that has passed between that lady and me were set down in writing, it would be a history that might be useful to other men." "I command thee then to relate it," said the Caliph. The young man obeyed, and began his history. End of section 27.
Section 28 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Rose. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 28. The story of the lady who was murdered and of the young man, her husband. Commander of the faithful, this murdered lady was my wife, daughter of this old man who is my uncle by the father's side. She was not above 12 years old when 11 years ago he gave her to me. I have 3 children by her, all boys, yet alive, and I must do her the justice to say that she never gave me the least occasion for offense. She was chaste, of good behavior, and made it her whole business to please me. And on my part, I ardently loved her, and in everything rather anticipated than opposed her wishes. About 2 months ago, she fell sick. I took all imaginable care of her, and spared nothing that could promote her speedy recovery. After a month thus passed, she began to grow better, and expressed a wish to go to the bath. Before she went, "Cousin," said she, for so she used to call me out of familiarity, "I long for some apples. If you would get me any, you would greatly please me. I have longed for them a great while, and I must own it is come to that height that if I be not satisfied very soon, I fear some misfortune will befall me." "I will cheerfully try," said I, "and do all in my power to make you easy." I went immediately around all the markets and shops in the town to seek for apples, but I could not get one, though I offered to pay a sequin apiece. I returned home much dissatisfied at my failure, and from my wife, when she returned from the bagnio and saw no apples, she became so very uneasy that she could not sleep all night. I got up by times in the morning, and went through all the gardens, but had no better success than the day before, only I happened to meet an old gardener who told me that all my pains would signify nothing, for I could not expect to find apples anywhere but in your Majesty's garden at Bassorah. As I loved my wife passionately and would not neglect to satisfy her, I dressed myself in a traveller's habit, and after I had told her my design, went to Bassorah, and made my journey with such speed that I returned at the end of 15 days with 3 apples, which cost me a sequin apiece, for as there were no more left, the gardener would not let me have them for less. As soon as I came home, I presented them to my wife, but her longing had ceased. She satisfied herself with receiving them, and laid them down by her. In the meantime she continued sickly, and I knew not what remedy to procure for her relief. Some few days after I returned from my journey, sitting in my shop in the public place where all sorts of fine stuffs are sold, I saw an ugly, tall, black slave come in, with an apple in his hand, which I knew to be one of those I had brought from Bassorah. I had no reason to doubt it, because I was certain there was not one to be had in Baghdad, nor in any of the gardens in the vicinity. I called to him and said, "Good slave, prithee tell me where thou hadst this apple." "It is a present," said he, smiling, "from my mistress. I went to see her today, and found her out of order. I saw 3 apples lying by her, and asked her where she had them. She told me the good man, her husband, had made a fortnight's journey on purpose, and brought them to her. We had a collation together, and when I took my leave of her, I brought away this apple." I rose, shut up my shop, ran home with all speed, and going to my wife's chamber, looked immediately for the apples, and seeing only 2, asked what was become of the 3rd. My wife, turning her head to the place where the apples lay, and perceiving there were but 2, answered me coldly, "Cousin, I know not what is become of it." At this reply I was convinced what the slave had told me was true, and giving myself up to madness and jealousy, drew my knife from my girdle, and thrust it into the unfortunate creature's throat. I afterwards cut off her head, and divided her body into 4 quarters, which I packed up in a bundle, sewed it up with a thread of red yarn, put all together in a trunk, and when night came, carried it on my shoulder down to the Tigris, where I sunk it. The 2 youngest of my children were asleep. The 3rd was out, but at my return I found him sitting by my gate, weeping. I asked him the reason. "Father," said he, "I took this morning from my mother, without her knowledge, one of those 3 apples you brought her, and kept it a long while. But as I was playing some time ago with my little brother in the street, a tall slave passing by snatched it out of my hands and carried it away. I ran after him, demanding it back, and besides told him that it belonged to my mother, who was sick, and that you had made a fortnight's journey to procure it, but all to no purpose. He would not restore it. And as I still followed him, crying out, he turned and beat me, and then ran away as fast as he could from one lane to another, till at length I lost sight of him. I have since been walking without the town, expecting your return, to pray you, dear father, not to tell my mother of it, lest it should make her worse." When he had thus spoken, he fell a-weeping again, more bitterly than before. My son's account afflicted me beyond measure, and then I found myself guilty of an enormous crime, and repented too late of having so easily believed the calumnies of a wretched slave, who, from what he had learned of my son, had invented that fatal falsehood. My uncle here present came just at that time to see his daughter, but instead of finding her alive, understood from me that she was dead, for I concealed nothing from him, and without staying for his censure, declared myself the greatest criminal in the world. Upon this, instead of reproaching me, he joined his tears with mine, and we together wept 3 days without intermission, he for the loss of a daughter whom he had loved tenderly, and I for the loss of a beloved wife, of whom I had deprived myself in so cruel a manner by giving too easy credit to the report of a lying slave. This, Commander of the Faithful, is the sincere confession your Majesty required from me. You have now heard all the circumstances of my crime, and I must humbly beg of you to order the punishment due for it. How severe soever it may be, I shall not in the least complain, but esteem it too easy and light." The Caliph was much astonished at the young man's relation. But this just prince, finding he was rather to be pitied than condemned, began to speak in his favour. "This young man's crime," said he, "is pardonable before God and excusable with men. The wicked slave is the sole cause of this murder. It is he alone that must be punished. Wherefore," continued he, looking upon the Grand Vizier, "I give you 3 days' time to find him out. If you do not bring him within that space, you shall die in his stead." The unfortunate Jaaffier had thought himself out of danger, was perplexed at this order of the Caliph, but as he durst not return any answer to the prince, whose hasty temper he knew too well, he departed from his presence, and retired melancholy to his house, convinced that he had but 3 days to live, for he was so fully persuaded that he should not find the slave that he made not the least inquiry after him. "Is it possible," said he, "that in such a city as Bagdad, where there is an infinite number of negro slaves, I should be able to find him out that is guilty? Unless God be pleased to interpose as he hath already to detest the murderer, nothing can save my life." He spent the first 2 days in mourning with his family, who sat round him weeping and complaining of the Caliph's cruelty. The 3rd day being arrived, he prepared himself to die with courage, as an honest minister, and one who had nothing to trouble his conscience. He sent for notaries and witnesses who signed his will. After which he took leave of his wife and children, and bade them farewell. All his family were drowned in tears, so that there never was a more sorrowful spectacle. At last a messenger came from the Caliph to tell him that he was out of all patience, having heard nothing from him concerning the negro slave whom he had commanded him to search for. "I am therefore ordered," said the messenger, "to bring you before his throne." The afflicted vizier obeyed the mandate, but as he was going out, they brought him his youngest daughter, about 5 or 6 years of age, to receive his last blessing. As he had a particular affection for that child, he prayed the messenger to give him leave to stop a moment, and taking his daughter in his arms, kissed her several times. As he kissed her, he perceived she had something in her bosom that looked bulky, and had a sweet scent. "My dear little one," said he, "what hast thou in thy bosom?" "My dear father," she replied, "it is an apple which our slave Rehan sold me for 2 sequins." At these words, apple and slave, the Grand Vizier uttered an exclamation of surprise intermixed with joy, and putting his hand into the child's bosom, pulled out the apple. He caused the slave, who was not far off, to be brought immediately, and when he came, "Rascal," said he, "where hadst thou this apple?" "My lord," replied the slave, "I swear to you that I neither stole it in your house, nor out of the commander of the faithful's garden. But the other day, as I was passing through a street where 3 or 4 children were at play, one of them having it in his hand, I snatched it from him and carried it away. The child ran after me, telling me it was not his own, but belonged to his mother, who was sick, and that his father, to satisfy her longing, had made a long journey, and brought home 3 apples, whereof this was one, which he had taken from his mother without her knowledge. He said all he could to prevail upon me to give it him back, but I refused, and so brought it home, and sold it for 2 sequins to the little lady, your daughter." Jaaffier could not reflect without astonishment that the mischievousness of a slave had been the cause of an innocent woman's death, and nearly of his own. He carried the slave along with him, and when he came before the Caliph, gave the prince an exact account of what the slave had told him, and the chance which led him to the discovery of his crime. Never was any surprise so great as that of the Caliph, Yet he could not refrain from falling into excessive fits of laughter. At last he recovered himself, and with a serious air told the vizier that since his slave had been the occasion of murder, he deserved an exemplary punishment. "I must own it," said the vizier, "but his guilt is not unpardonable. I remember the wonderful history of a vizier of Cairo, and am ready to relate it, upon condition that if your majesty finds it more astonishing than that which gives me occasion to tell it, you will be pleased to pardon my slave." "I consent," said the Caliph, "but you undertake a hard task, for I do not believe you can save your slave, the story of the apples being so very singular." Upon this, Jaafar began his story thus. End of section 28.
Section 29 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A recording by Zappo. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 29. The Story of Nur ad-Din Ali and Budir ad-Din Husun. Commander of the Faithful, there was formerly a Sultan of Egypt, a strict observer of justice, gracious, merciful, and liberal, and his valour made him terrible to his neighbours. He loved the poor, and protected the learned, whom he advanced to the highest dignities. This Sultan had a vizier, who was prudent, wise, sagacious, and well versed in all sciences. This minister had 2 sons, who in everything followed his footsteps. The eldest was called Shumse ad-Din Mahmud, and the younger Nur ad-Din Ali. The latter was endowed with all the good qualities that man could possess. The vizier, their father, being dead, the Sultan caused them both to put on the robes of a vizier. "I am as sorry," said he, "as you are for the loss of your father, and because I know you live together and love one another cordially, I will bestow his dignity upon you conjointly. Go and imitate your father's conduct." The 2 new viziers humbly thanked the Sultan, and retired to make due preparation for their father's interment. They did not go abroad for a month, after which they repaired to court, and attended their duties. When the Sultan hunted, one of the brothers accompanied him, and this honour they had by turns. One evening, as they were conversing together after a cheerful meal, the next day being the elder brother's turn to hunt with the Sultan, he said to his younger brother, "Since neither of us is yet married, and we live so affectionately together, let us both wed the same day, sisters out of some family that may suit our quality. What do you think of this plan?" "Brother," answered the other vizier, "there cannot be a better thought. For my part, I will agree to anything you approve." "But this is not all," said the elder. "My fancy carries me farther. Suppose both our wives should conceive the first night of our marriage, and should happen to be brought to bed on one day, yours of a son and mine of a daughter. We will give them to each other in marriage." "Nay," said Nur ad-Din aloud, "I must acknowledge that this prospect is admirable. Such a marriage will perfect our union, and I willingly consent to it. But then, brother," said he farther, if this marriage should happen, would you expect that my son should settle a jointure on your daughter?" "There is no difficulty in that," replied the other, "for I am persuaded that, besides the usual articles of the marriage contract, you will not fail to promise in his name at least 3,000 sequins, 3 landed estates, and 3 slaves." "No," said the younger, "I will not consent to that. Are we not brethren and equal in title and dignity? Do not you and I know what is just? The male being nobler than the female, it is your part to give a large dowry with your daughter. By what I perceive, you are a man that would have your business done at another's charge." Although Nur ad-Din spoke these words in jest, his brother, being of a hasty temper, was offended, and falling into a passion, said, "A mischief upon your son, since you prefer him before my daughter. I wonder you had so much confidence as to believe him worthy of her. You must needs have lost your judgment to think you are my equal, and say we are colleagues. I would have you to know that since you are so vain, I would not marry my daughter to your son, though you would give him more than you are worth." This pleasant quarrel between 2 brothers about the marriage of their children before they were born went so far that Shumse ad-Din concluded by threatening, "Were I not tomorrow," said he, "to attend the Sultan, I would treat you as you deserve. But at my return, I will make you sensible that it does not become a younger brother to speak so insolently to his elder as you have done to me." Upon this he retired to his apartment in anger. Shumse ad-Din, rising early next morning, attended the Sultan, who went to hunt near the pyramids. As for Nur ad-Din, he was very uneasy all night, and supposing it would not be possible to live longer with a brother who had treated him with so much haughtiness, he provided a stout mule, furnished himself with money and jewels, and, having told his people that he was going on a private journey for 2 or 3 days, departed. When out of Cairo, he rode by way of the desert towards Arabia, but his mule happening to tire, was forced to continue his journey on foot. A courier, who was going to Bussorah, by good fortune overtaking him, took him up behind him. As soon as the courier reached that city, Nur ad-Din alighted, and returned him thanks for his kindness. As he went about to seek for a lodging, he saw a person of quality with a numerous retinue, to whom all the people showed the greatest respect, and stood still till he had passed. This personage was Grand Vizier to the Sultan of Bussorah, who was passing through the city to see that the inhabitants kept good order and discipline. This minister, casting his eyes by chance on Nur ad-Din Ali, perceiving something extraordinary in his aspect, looked very attentively upon him, and, as he saw him in a traveller's habit, stopped his train, asked him who he was, and from whence he came. "Sir," said Nur ad-Din, "I am an Egyptian, born at Cairo, and have left my country because of the unkindness of a near relation, resolved to travel through the world, and rather to die than return home." The Grand Vizier, who was a good-natured man, after hearing these words, said to him, "Son, beware. Do not pursue your design. You are not sensible of the hardships you must endure. Follow me, I may perhaps make you forget the misfortunes which have forced you to leave your own country." Nur ad-Din followed the Grand Vizier, who soon discovered his good qualities, and conceived for him so great an affection, that one day he said to him in private, "My son, I am, as you see, so far gone in years, that it is not probable I shall live much longer. Heaven has bestowed on me only one daughter, who is as beautiful as you are handsome, and now fit for marriage. Several nobles of the highest rank at this court have sought her for their sons, but I would not grant their request. I have an affection for you, and think you so worthy to be received into my family, that, preferring you before all those who have demanded her, I am ready to accept you for my son-in-law. If you like the proposal, I will acquaint the Sultan my master that I have adopted you by this marriage, and entreat him to grant you the reversion of my dignity of Grand Vizier in the kingdom of Bussorah. In the meantime, nothing being more requisite for me than ease in my old age, I will not only put you in possession of great part of my estate, but leave the administration of public affairs to your management." When the Grand Vizier had concluded this kind and generous proposal, Nur ad-Din fell at his feet, and expressing himself in terms that demonstrated his joy and gratitude, assured him that he was at his command in every way. Upon this, the Vizier sent for his chief domestics, ordered them to adorn the great hall of his palace, and prepare a splendid feast. He afterwards sent to invite the nobility of the court and city, to honour him with their company, and when they were all met, Nur ad-Din having made known his quality, he said to the noblemen present, for he thought it proper to speak thus on purpose to satisfy those to whom he had refused his alliance, "I am now, my lords, to discover a circumstance which hitherto I have kept a secret. I have a brother who is Grand Vizier to the Sultan of Egypt. This brother has but one son, whom he would not marry in the court of Egypt, but sent him hither to wed my daughter, in order that both branches of our family may be united. His son, whom I knew to be my nephew as soon as I saw him, is the young man I now present to you as my son-in-law. I hope you will do me the honour to be present at his wedding, which I am resolved to celebrate this day." The nobleman, who could not be offended at his preferring his nephew to the great matches that had been proposed, allowed that he had very good reason for his choice, were willing to be witnesses to the ceremony, and wished that God might prolong his days to enjoy the satisfaction of the happy match. The lords met at the Vizier of Bussorah's palace, having testified their satisfaction at the marriage of his daughter with Nur ad-Din Ali, sat down to a magnificent repast, after which notaries came in with the marriage contract, and the chief lords signed it. And when the company had departed, the Grand Vizier ordered his servants to have everything in readiness for Nur ad-Din Ali to bathe. He had fine new linen, and rich vestments provided for him in the greatest profusion. Having bathed and dressed, he was perfumed with the most odoriferous essences, and went to compliment the Vizier, his father-in-law, who was exceedingly pleased with his noble demeanour. Having made him sit down, "My son," said he, "you have declared to me who you are, and the office you held at the court of Egypt. You have also told me of a difference betwixt you and your brother, which occasioned you to leave your country. I desire you to make me your entire confidant, and to acquaint me with the cause of your quarrel, for now you have no reason either to doubt my affection, or to conceal anything from me." Nur ad-Din informed him of every circumstance of the quarrel, at which the vizier burst out into a fit of laughter and said, "This is one of the strangest occurrences I ever heard. Is it possible, my son, that your quarrel should rise so high about an imaginary marriage? I am sorry you fell out with your elder brother upon such a frivolous matter. But he was also wrong in being angry at what you only spoke in jest, and I ought to thank heaven for that difference which has procured me such a son-in-law. But, continued the vizier, it is late and time for you to retire. Go to your bride, my son. She expects you. Tomorrow I will present you to the Sultan, and hope he will receive you in such a manner as shall satisfy us both." Nur ad-Din Ali took leave of his father-in-law, and retired to his bridal apartment. It is remarkable that Shumse ad-Din Mahmud happened also to marry at Cairo the very same day that this marriage was solemnized at Bussorah, the particulars of which are as follow. After Nur ad-Din Ali left Cairo, with an intention never to return, his elder brother, who was hunting with the Sultan of Egypt, was absent for a month, for the Sultan, being fond of the chase, continued it often for so long a period. At his return, Shumse ad-Din was much surprised when he understood that, under pretence of taking a short journey, his brother departed from Cairo on a mule the same day as the Sultan, and had never appeared since. It vexed him so much the more, because he did not doubt but the harsh words he had used had occasioned his flight. He sent a messenger in search of him, who went to Damascus and as far as Aleppo, but Nur ad-Din was then at Bussorah. When the courier returned and brought no news of him, Shumse ad-Din intended to make further inquiry after him in other parts, but in the meantime matched with the daughter of one of the greatest lords in Cairo, upon the same day in which his brother married the daughter of the Grand Vizier of Bussorah. At the end of 9 months, the wife of Shumse ad-Din was brought to bed of a daughter at Cairo, and on the same day the lady of Nur ad-Din was delivered of a son at Bussorah, who was called Budir ad-Din Husun. The Grand Vizier of Bussorah testified his joy for the birth of his grandson by gifts and public entertainments, and, to show his son-in-law the great esteem he had for him, he went to the palace, and most humbly besought the Sultan to grant Nur ad-Din Ali his office, that he might have the comfort before his death to see his son-in-law made Grand Vizier in his stead. The Sultan, who had conceived a distinguished regard for Nur ad-Din when the Vizier had presented him upon his marriage, and had ever since heard everybody speak well of him, readily granted his father-in-law's request, and caused Nur ad-Din immediately to be invested with the robe and insignia of the Vizarut, such as state drums, standards, and writing apparatus of gold, richly enamelled and set with jewels. The next day, when the father saw his son-in-law preside in council, as he himself had done, and perform all the offices of Grand Vizier, his joy was complete. Nur ad-Din Ali conducted himself with that dignity and propriety which showed him to have been used to state affairs, and engaged the approbation of the Sultan and reverence and affection of the people. The old Vizier of Bussorah died about 4 years afterwards, with great satisfaction, seeing a branch of his family that promised so fair to support its future consequence and respectability. Nur ad-Din Ali performed his last duty to him with all possible love and gratitude, and as soon as his son Budir ad-Din Husun had attained the age of 7 years, provided him an excellent tutor, who taught him such things as became his birth. The child had a ready wit, and a genius capable of receiving all the good instructions that could be given. After Budir ad-Din had been 2 years under the tuition of his master, who taught him perfectly to read, he learnt the Koran by heart. His father put him afterwards to other tutors, by whom his mind was cultivated to such a degree, that when he was 12 years of age, he had no more occasion for them, and then, as his physiognomy promised wonders, he was admired by all who saw him. Hitherto, his father had kept him to study, but now he introduced him to the Sultan, who received him graciously. The people who saw him in the streets were charmed with his demeanour, and gave him 1,000 blessings. His father, proposing to render him capable of supplying his place, accustomed him to business of the greatest moment, on purpose to qualify him betimes. In short, he omitted nothing to advance a son he loved so well. But as he began to enjoy the fruits of his labour, he was suddenly seized by a violent fit of sickness, and finding himself past recovery, disposed himself to die a good Mussulman. In that last and precious moment, he forgot not his son, but called for him and said, "My son, you see, this world is transitory. There is nothing durable but in that to which I shall speedily go. You must therefore from henceforth begin to fit yourself for this change, as I have done. You must prepare for it without murmuring, so as to have no trouble of conscience for not having acted the part of a really honest man. As for your religion, you are sufficiently instructed in it, by what you have learned from your tutors and your own study, and as to what belongs to an upright man, I shall give you some instructions, of which I hope you will make good use, as it is a necessary thing to know oneself, and you cannot come to that knowledge without you first understand who I am. I shall now inform you. I am a native of Egypt. My father, your grandfather, was first minister to the Sultan of that kingdom. I had myself the honour to be vizier to that Sultan, and so has my brother, your uncle, who I suppose is yet alive. His name is Shumse ad-Din Mahmud. I was obliged to leave him and come into this country, where I have raised myself to the high dignity I now enjoy. But you will understand all these matters more fully by a manuscript that I shall give you." At the same time, Nur ad-Din Ali gave to his son a memorandum book, saying, "Take and read it at your leisure. You will find, among other things, the day of my marriage and that of your birth. These are circumstances which perhaps you may hereafter have occasion to know. Therefore you must keep it very carefully." Budir ad-Din Husun, being sincerely afflicted to see his father in this condition, and sensibly touched with his discourse, could not but weep when he received the memorandum book, and promised at the same time never to part with it. That very moment Nur ad-Din fainted, so that it was thought he would have expired. But he came to himself again, and spoke as follows. "My son, the first instruction I give you is not to make yourself familiar with all sorts of people. The way to live happy is to keep your mind to yourself, and not to tell your thoughts too easily. Secondly, not to do violence to anybody whatever, for in that case you will draw everybody's hatred upon you. You ought to consider the world as a creditor, to whom you owe moderation, compassion, and forbearance. Thirdly, not to say a word when you are reproached, for, as the proverb says, he that keeps silence is out of danger. And in this case particularly you ought to practice it. You also know what one of our poets says upon this subject, that silence is the ornament and safeguard of life, that our speech ought not to be like a storm of hail that spoils all. Never did any man yet repent of having spoken too little, whereas many have been sorry that they spoke so much. Fourthly, to drink no wine, for that is the source of all vices. Fifthly, to be frugal in your way of living. If you do not squander your estate, it will maintain you in time of necessity. I do not mean you should be either profuse or niggardly, for though you have little, if you husband it well and lay it out on proper occasions, you will have many friends. But if on the contrary you have great riches and make but a bad use of them, all the world will forsake you and leave you to yourself. In short, the virtuous Nur ad-Din continued till the last aspiration of his breath to give good advice to his son, and when he was dead, he was magnificently interred. Nur ad-Din was buried with all the honours due to his rank. Buddir ad-Din Husun of Bussorah, for so he was called because born in that city, was with grief for the death of his father, that instead of a month's time to mourn, according to custom, he kept himself shut up in tears and solitude about 2 months, without seeing anybody, or so much as going abroad to pay his duty to his sovereign. The Sultan, being displeased at his neglect, and looking upon it as a slight, suffered his passion to prevail, and in his anger called for the new Grand Vizier, for he had created another on the death of Nur ad-Din, commanded him to go to the house of the deceased, and seize upon it with all his other houses, lands, and effects, without leaving anything for Buddir ad-Din Husun, and to confine his person. The new Grand Vizier, accompanied by his officers, went immediately to execute his commission. But one of Buddir ad-Din Husun's slaves, happening accidentally to come into the crowd, no sooner understood the vizier's errand that he ran before to give his master warning. He found him sitting in the vestibule of his house, as melancholy as if his father had been but newly dead. He fell down at his feet out of breath, and after he had kissed the hem of his garment, cried out, "My lord, save yourself immediately." The unfortunate youth, lifting up his head, exclaimed, "What news dost thou bring?" "My lord," said he, "there is no time to be lost. The Sultan is incensed against you, has sent to confiscate your estates and to seize your person." The words of this faithful and affectionate slave occasioned Buddir ad-Din Husun great alarm. "May not I have so much time," said he, "as to take some money and jewels along with me?" "No, sir," replied the slave, "the Grand Vizier will be here this moment. Be gone immediately. Save yourself." The unhappy youth rose hastily from his sofa, put his feet in his sandals, and after he had covered his head with the skirt of his vest, that his face might not be known, fled without knowing what way to go to avoid the impending danger. He ran without stopping till he came to the public burying ground, and as it was growing dark, resolved to pass that night in his father's tomb. It was a large edifice covered by a dome, which Nur ad-Din Ali, as is common with the Mussulmans, had erected for his sepulture. On the way, Buddir ad-Din met a Jew, who was a banker and merchant, and was returning from a place where his affairs had called him to the city. The Jew, knowing Buddir ad-Din, stopped and saluted him very courteously. Isaac the Jew, after he had paid his respects to Buddir ad-Din Husun by kissing his hand, said, "My lord, dare I be so bold as to ask whither you are going at this time of night, alone and so much troubled? Has anything disquieted you?" "Yes," said Buddir ad-Din. "A while ago I was asleep, and my father appeared to me in a dream, looking very fiercely upon me, as if much displeased. I started out of my sleep in alarm, and came out immediately to go and pray upon his tomb." "My lord," said the Jew, who did not know the true reason why Buddir ad-Din had left the town, "your father of happy memory, and my good lord, had store of merchandise in several vessels which are yet at sea and belong to you. I beg the favour of you to grant me the refusal of them before any other merchant. I am able to pay down ready money for all the goods that are in your ships. And, to begin, if you will give me those that happen to come in the first that arrives in safety, I will pay you down in part of payment 1,000 sequins." And, drawing out a bag from under his vest, he showed it him sealed up with one seal. Buddir ad-Din Husun, being banished from home and dispossessed of all that he had in the world, looked on this proposal of the Jew as a favour from heaven, and therefore accepted it with joy. "My lord," said the Jew, "then you sell me for 1,000 sequins the lading of the first of your ships that shall arrive in port?" "Yes," answered Buddir ad-Din, "I sell it to you for 1,000 sequins. It is done." Upon this the Jew delivered him the bag of 1,000 sequins, and offered to count them, but Buddir ad-Din said he would trust his word. "Since it is so, my lord," said he, "be pleased to favour me with a small note of the bargain we have made." As he spoke, he pulled the inkhorn from his girdle, and, taking a small reed out of it neatly cut for writing, presented it to him with a piece of paper. Buddir ad-Din Husun wrote these words: "This writing is to testify that Buddir ad-Din Husun of Bussorah has sold to Isaac the Jew, for the sum of 1,000 sequins, received in hand, the lading of the first of his ships that shall arrive in this port." This note he delivered to the Jew, after having stamped it with his seal, and then took his leave of him. While Isaac pursued his journey to the city, Buddir ad-Din made the best of his way to his father's tomb. When he came to it, he prostrated himself to the ground, and, with his eyes full of tears, deplored his miserable condition. "Alas," said he, "unfortunate Buddir ad-Din, what will become of thee? Whither canst thou fly for refuge against the unjust prince who persecutes thee? Was it not enough to be afflicted by the death of so dear a father? Must fortune needs add new misfortunes to just complaints?" He continued a long time in this posture, but at last rose up, and, leaning his head upon his father's tombstone, his sorrows returned more violently than before, so that he sighed and mourned, till, overcome with heaviness, he sunk upon the floor and dropped asleep. He had not slept long, when a genie, who had retired to the cemetery during the day, and was intending, according to his custom, to range about the world at night, entered the sepulchre, and finding Buddir ad Deen lying on his back, was surprised at his beauty. When the genie had attentively considered Buddir ad Deen Houssun, he said to himself, "To judge of this creature by his beauty, he would seem to be an angel of the terrestrial paradise, whom God has sent to put the world in a flame by his charms." At last, after he had satisfied himself with looking at him, he took a flight into the air, where, meeting by chance with a Peri, they saluted one another, after which he said to her, "Pray descend with me into the cemetery where I dwell, and I will show you a beauty worthy of your admiration." The Peri consented, and both descended in an instant. They came into the tomb. "Look," said the genie, showing her Buddir ad Deen Houssun. "Did you ever see a youth more beautiful?" The Peri, having attentively observed Buddir ad Deen, replied, "I must confess that he is a very handsome man, but I am just come from seeing an object at Cairo more admirable than this, and if you will hear me, I will relate her unhappy fate." "You will very much oblige me," answered the genie. "You must know, then," said the Peri, "that the Sultan of Egypt has a vizier, Shumse ad Deen Mahmud, who has a daughter most beautiful and accomplished. The Sultan, having heard of this young lady's beauty, sent the other day for her father, and said, 'I understand you have a daughter to marry. I would have her for my bride. Will not you consent?' The vizier, who did not expect this proposal, was troubled, and instead of accepting it joyfully, which another in his place would certainly have done, he answered the Sultan, 'May it please your majesty, I am not worthy of the honor you would confer upon me, and I most humbly beseech you to pardon me if I do not accede to your request. You know I had a brother, who had the honor, as well as myself, to be one of your viziers. We had some difference together, which was the cause of his leaving me suddenly. Since that time I have had no account of him, till within these 4 days, that I heard he died at Bussorah, being Grand Vizier to the Sultan of that kingdom. He has left a son, and there having been an agreement between us to match our children together, I am persuaded he intended that match when he died, and being desirous to fulfill the promise on my part, I conjure your majesty to grant me permission." The Sultan of Egypt, provoked at this denial of his vizier, said to him in anger which he could not restrain, "Is this the way in which you requite my condescension, in stooping so low as to desire your alliance? I know how to revenge your presumption in daring to prefer another to me, and I swear that your daughter shall be married to the most contemptible and ugly of my slaves." Having thus spoken, he angrily commanded the vizier to quit his presence. The vizier retired to his palace, full of confusion and overwhelmed in despair. This very day the Sultan sent for one of his grooms, who is humpbacked, big-bellied, crook-legged, and as ugly as a hobgoblin, and after having commanded the vizier to marry his daughter to this ghastly slave, He caused the contract to be made and signed by witnesses in his own presence. The preparations for this fantastical wedding are all ready, and this very moment all the slaves belonging to the lords of the court of Egypt are waiting at the door of the bath, each with a flambeau in his hand, for the crook-back groom, who is bathing, to go along with them to his bride, who is already dressed to receive him. And when I departed from Cairo, the ladies met for that purpose were going to conduct her in her nuptial attire to the hall where she is to receive her hump-backed bridegroom, and is this minute expecting him. I have seen her, and do assure you that no person can behold her without admiration.
When the Perie left off speaking, the genie said to her, "Whatever you think or say, I cannot be persuaded that the girl's beauty exceeds that of this young man."
"I will not dispute it with you," answered the Perie, "for I must confess he deserves to be married to that charming creature whom they design for humpback. And I think it were a deed worthy of us to obstruct the Sultan of Egypt's injustice, and put this young gentleman in the room of the slave."
"You are in the right," answered the genie. "I am extremely obliged to you for so good a thought. Let us deceive him. I consent to your revenge upon the Sultan of Egypt. Let us comfort a distressed father, and make his daughter as happy as she thinks herself miserable. I will do my utmost endeavours to make this project succeed, and I am persuaded you will not be backward. I will be at the pains to carry him to Cairo before he awakes, and afterwards leave it to your care to carry him elsewhere when we have accomplished our design."
The Perie and the genie, having thus concerted what they had to do, the genie lifted up Buddir ad-Deen Houssun gently, and with an inconceivable swiftness conveyed him through the air, and set him down at the door of a building next to the bath, whence humpback was to come with a train of slaves that waited for him. Buddir ad-Deen awoke, and was naturally alarmed at finding himself in the middle of a city he knew not. He was going to cry out, but the genie touched him gently on the shoulder, and forbade him to speak. He then put a torch in his hand, saying, "Go and mix with the crowd at the door of the bath. Follow them till you come into a hall, where they are going to celebrate a marriage. The bridegroom is a humpbacked fellow, and by that you will easily know him. Put yourself at the right hand as you go in, open the purse of sequins you have in your bosom, distribute them among the musicians and dancers as they go along, and when you are got into the hall, give money also to the female slaves you see about the bride. But every time you put your hand in your purse, be sure to take out a whole handful, and do not spare them. Observe to do everything exactly as I have desired you. Be not afraid of any person, and leave the rest to a superior power who will order matters as he thinks fit." Buddir ad-Deen, being well instructed in all that he was to do, advanced towards the door of the bath. The first thing he did was to light his torch at that of a slave, and then, mixing among them as if he belonged to some noblemen of Cairo, he marched along as they did, and followed humpback, who came out of the bath, and mounted a horse from the Sultan's own stable. Buddir ad-Deen, coming near to the musicians, and men and women dancers, who went just before the bridegroom,
pulled out time after time whole handfuls of sequins, which he distributed among them, and as he thus gave his money with an unparalleled grace and engaging mien, all who received it fixed their eyes upon him, and after they had a full view of his face, they found him so handsome that they could not withdraw their attention. End of section 29. Recording by Zappo.